Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for being here with us, Kosam. So just to introduce about Kosam Nyamdella, he's the president of Project Management Institute of New Zealand, and he's also an alumni of Victoria and a recent graduate of Master of Professional Business Analysis. So, to understand about the future of work and how organizations will be impacted, I thought better than Mr. Kosam, who's been interacting with so many professionals from different sectors and so many professional associations. And I think he would be the best person to give us an idea from a New Zealand context across different industries. So, thank you so much again for being here. And so to get to the core of our discussion, can you tell us how COVID-19 has impacted the ways of working internationally? And what do you think are the trends that will, persist in the work environment after we, get out of the coronavirus?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be considered to take part in this, and I think it's a very important exercise. So, coming to your question, it seems as if it's in two parts. So, I am in touch with my colleagues in international chapters, and we have regular meetings. And the consensus is, in a nutshell, COVID-19 has sort of accelerated the digital transformation process, where companies were going to complete that in years. They managed to do it in weeks. So that was the biggest impact of COVID, which is to some extent positive, but to some extent had some adverse effects because some of the companies were not prepared to accelerate the digital transformation process.
That's perfect. So, so when you talk about so when you talk about digital transformation, what do you think is the role of automation and analytics, in helping organize decide to revamp their processes?
Right. So there are two ways of looking at it. Most organizations did not know about automation and analysis in the first place. So they wouldn't have known how to use that. But those that had that capability did have a good edge in terms of using a lot of data that was available in terms of people who were now moving onto digital platforms and capitalizing on those numbers and sort of using things like social media, where a lot of people became more active to promote their businesses. And those companies that already had the capability did take advantage of it, but those that did not have it were at a loss.
And what do you think would be the role of artificial intelligence, when you look at the workplace, the revised workplace, the transformed workplace?
Right. So in the new ways of working, which is what they're calling it these days, artificial intelligence plays a very big part in terms of helping humans to make decisions. There is a limit to our cognitive process as humans in terms of how much data we can process. And the use of an artificial intelligence, um, if it is set up properly, would actually help in making the right decisions, as it can collect the data we need, process that data, and give us an indication of how to use that data.
Perfect.
So it takes a lot of errors away from the inherent human problems that we have in terms of analyzing data.
Awesome. Thank you. That I think is a great perspective. And so now when we're looking at different ways of working, an interesting question would be, how do you handle the cultural differences, between people, between colleagues or teammates? Because now we are no longer having the opportunity to meet and talk, and we're looking at agile face-to-face interactions are quite important. So, how can you tackle different cultures in in the new ways of work?
Right. So that question goes beyond cultures. It also includes things like diversity, where you have gender and tolerance and all the like. So because people were working from home, it means that the environment was different. And those with children would have children with them. So the dynamics of working for them would have been different to those where they were have going to work without the children. And they didn't have people to help them with the children. So that was another dynamic there. And then the cultural aspect also comes into effect where how people behave at home, which is different from how they behave at work. So at home, most people usually tend to default to their original cultures, and they have a setting which sort of supports that. Whereas the work environment is universal and accepts anything like anyone, and everyone is used to that. So it comes to a point where you need to have to allow for that extra tolerance and understanding, which in a nutshell has been said before. Just be kind and, get to know how other people do, and just start off with uh, asking how they are doing and so on and so forth, so that you can gauge the mood that they are in before you start talking about anything else.
That's a very humane approach. I think that will make the whole thing quite easy for people to manage, because now if you're having that kind of sensitivity, the way you talk, I'm sure everybody would be happy to talk to you, and so that will probably make the whole remote working more easy. That's amazing. Thanks. Um, the
Mm.
next aspect is now, how do you think the technology has changed after COVID? And what do you think are the costs or the benefits, that the change in technology brings to organizations?
Right. So we have seen a lot of developments in terms of online tools for communication. For instance, if you look at Zoom, it was and still is one of the most convenient platforms for communication, but there were concerns about its security. So they did step up that security aspect of it, and now it's more or less acceptable, and it's more or less on the same or similar kind of platform as the rest of them. So there was quite a lot of improvement in terms of delivery as well as ease of use um, um, in communication platforms. And most of the other software platforms have been sort of changed to be able to be worked on remotely, uh, so that they are more friendly to be to have collaborations, remote collaborations, and so on and so forth. So, and also the literacy for the people using the technology is also grown in leaps and bounds over a very short time because they had to, there was no choice. So there is quite a lot of contributing factors to, besides the technology itself, the people themselves have done quite a lot in catching up, so to speak.
That makes brilliant sense. Thanks. And what do you think are the benefits or costs? In the sense, do you think that now, like there could be more savings for companies by working in this way, or do you think that it's more costly for companies to work in this way?
Right. So it depends on the company. For some companies, they have actually realized very good benefits in remote working, and they are now revising their models to include remote working. And some of them who were not flexible before, where the traditional thinking that people have to be on their desk to do their work, have since changed that aspect. But there are some companies where they must be at the desk to do their job. So for those companies, it's not going to change. It's always going to be business as usual. But in saying that, even those companies that people need to be at work would have some aspects where people can work from home. And going forward, I think they would need to think about how best to integrate the work from home aspect, because COVID-19 may be the first of a number of problems that are going to force us to work from home.
Wow. Okay. So that's one prediction that makes me, kind of shiver because you already have a lot of problems that you expect, is it? Okay. So
Mm.
moving on, thank you for that. And I think you've been quite perceptive in the way you've, given your ideas. Uh, so can you please tell me how international companies can stay nimble and agile, and how technology can help in bringing that agility in international companies?
Right. So, with respect to COVID-19, we found that the world has become like an even smaller global village. Uh, we had constant video meetings with people from all over the world. In some of those meetings were meetings that we used to travel to have. And now we found out that it's really not necessary to travel. So the global community can benefit in that they will cut out all those travel costs and accommodation costs in terms of being effective in delivering their goods, delivering their value propositions, and so on and so forth. So they will be able to interact even better and would not really need to have a lot of time being wasted in traveling from one country to another. They can just do it more or less like any other meeting they would have locally. So that aspect there is speeded up the way international companies can implement any projects or operational updates and so on and so forth. And with the developments in the communications in terms of broadband, where the quality of video signals is quite good, you can actually see people and you can talk to them in real time. So there is really no need for people to travel. And that is one of the biggest advantages that international companies could leverage on in delivering their strategies.
Thanks. That's a very valid point, and I think that's a great point
Mm.
made.
Yeah,
That's a great
and in
point.
addition, yes, and in addition, you'd also eliminate the need for immigration and visas and the like. So that's another additional thing that you would also eliminate. You don't need to have a visa to talk on Zoom.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
perfect. So you're right. You don't
Mm.
have to worry about visa sponsorship, and there's no
No,
problem in traveling and
no,
accommodation, and you can do it from wherever, whenever. So, however, that's perfect, and that is quite nimble.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so the last part of it is, how do you think we can manage the risks associated with using these new technologies, and what other risks you perceive by, in the future of work?
May you repeat that? I sort of missed the first part.
Sure. What are the risks that you perceive in this new ways of working? Like, in the sense, for example, just to say, if you're sitting all day long by yourself and you're working, mental health could be one issue. Besides that, you said Zoom yourself, like it is prone to attacks. So that's one thing. That's the other kind of risk. So, what other risks do you think are associated with this way of working, and what could be the mitigation of such risks?
Right. So, are you talking about remote working or just the new ways of working?
I think I'd go with new ways of working. And what I gave was quite a very narrow perspective, but
Yeah.
just an indication.
Okay, so I guess we are now moving towards a time where we are relying more and more on machines to help us make decisions, like the artificial intelligence we were talking about. So one of the biggest risks in doing that is losing our humanity. Um, for instance, if I have been, say, behind in my bill payments, and I call one of the utility providers and say, oh, can I talk to someone? I talk to a machine, and the machine says, these are the figures you must pay by this. And I cannot reason with that machine in terms of why I haven't been able to pay and when I'll be able to pay. So we lose that aspect of humanity and human contact. That's the biggest loss that I can see. The other risks are relatively minor in comparison, and they the mental health you talk about is mostly prevalent in those who would be forced into remote working with no option of going into the office. But if they have occasional interactions with other people, then that could also help them in terms of getting better and getting to be more human. So it's the humanity aspect that we need to preserve.
That's a lovely point. So, how do you think we can mitigate that risk, though? So that's a very beautiful point you made. But how can we get over that risk? How can we manage that risk?
Right. So we need, because most of this is relatively new to a lot of people. So it depends on the company, the organization they are setting, and the challenges they are facing and how they are applying the solutions. So they need to get some form of feedback from the changes to all the stakeholders who are involved, not only the people who are implementing them, but everyone who is affected by those changes. If they can get an honest 360-degree feedback, that will help them in analyzing the impact in possible solutions that they can implement to mitigate those risks.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I think you've made a very clear, you've given us a very clear perspective on all the questions we had regarding the future of work. And I couldn't thank you more for being here and for giving all your ideas. I hope you have a great day ahead. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And those were my thoughts, and other people may have different views, but that's what I think. Thank you very
No,
much for
but
having
we
me.
do think you have a lot of perspective there because you've been interacting with a lot of international, colleagues. PMINZ being a global body gives you that kind of knowledge and kind of exposure. So I think we have very valuable points here. Thanks. Have a great day. See you
Thanks,
then.
Sabitha. Good luck with your project.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.